The air in Lucas Harper's cramped Albuquerque classroom smelled of chalk dust and teenage apathy. It was a sweltering May afternoon in 2025, and his 11th graders were more interested in their phones than his lecture on quadratic equations. Lucas, a wiry 32-year-old with a mop of sandy hair and a penchant for dad joke humor, stood at the blackboard, marker in hand, trying to make math sound less like torture. "Come on, people," he said, grinning. "X squared plus y squared isn't gonna bite you unless you're a polynomial in a horror movie." A few kids snorted, but most just stared blankly. Lucas sighed. Teaching was his passion, but some days it felt like shouting into a void. He turned to erase the board when a strange hum filled the room, low and resonant, like a tuning fork struck deep in the earth. The fluorescent lights flickered. His students didn't notice, heads down, scrolling ex-posts, but Lucas froze. The hum grew louder, vibrating in his chest, and the air seemed to shimmer like heat rising off asphalt. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. "What the?" Before he could finish, the blackboard rippled, as if it were liquid, and a blinding flash swallowed the room. When his vision cleared, Lucas was no longer in Albuquerque. He stood in a dense jungle, the air thick with humidity and the screech of unseen birds. Towering ceiba trees loomed overhead, their canopies blotting out the sun, while vines snaked across the ground like living ropes. The scent of earth and decay filled his lungs, mingled with something sharp smoke, maybe. His sneakers sank into the muddy soil, and he realized his marker was still clutched in his hand, useless now. His heart pounded. "Okay, Lucas," he muttered. "Either you're dreaming or you just flunked reality." He wasn't dreaming. In the distance, massive stone structures pierced the jungle canopy-stepped pyramids, their surfaces carved with intricate glyphs and snarling faces, temples. His stomach lurched. He'd seen pictures like this in history books, in documentaries about ancient Mesoamerica, the Maya, but this wasn't a ruin. The stone gleamed, freshly cut, and the air carried the rhythmic chant of voices, the clatter of tools. This was no tourist site. This was alive. Lucas stumbled forward, his mind racing. Time travel? Impossible. Yet here he was, a math teacher from New Mexico, standing in what looked like a Mayan city in its prime. He glanced at his clothes jeans, a faded Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt, and sneakers. He stuck out like a sore thumb. "Great," he whispered. "I'm the weirdest conquistador ever." As he crept toward the city, the jungle parted to reveal a sprawling plaza. Stone buildings, painted red and blue, flanked a central courtyard where people bustled, men in loincloths, women in woven dresses, their hair adorned with feathers and jade. Merchants hawked goods, maize, cacao beans, obsidian blades. Children darted through the crowd, laughing, their faces smudged with dirt. At the plaza's heart stood a towering pyramid, its steps stained dark, as if by blood. Lucas swallowed hard. He'd read about Mayan sacrifices. This was no place for a guy who got queasy at the sight of a paper cut. He ducked behind a stone pillar, trying to blend in, which was about as effective as a neon sign in a blackout. A group of children nearby caught his eye. They were crouched in the dirt, playing a game with pebbles, but their chatter was chaotic, not strategic. Lucas squinted. They weren't counting the pebbles, they were just tossing them, guessing who had more. No numbers, no math. His teacher instincts kicked in. These kids weren't just playing, they were lost, illiterate, untaught, their world devoid of the tools he took for granted. Before he could process this, a shadow fell over him. A man loomed, his chest bare, a jaguar skin cloak draped over his shoulders. His face was painted with black stripes, and his eyes glinted like obsidian. A priest, Lucas guessed, or some kind of official. The man barked something in a language Lucas didn't understand. His tone sharp, Lucas raised his hands, forcing a smile. Hi, I'm Lucas. I come in peace, you know, like E.T.? The man's scowl deepened. He gestured to two guards, their spears tipped with gleaming flint. Lucas's smile faltered. Okay, not an E.T. fan. Got it. The guards seized his arms, dragging him toward the pyramid. The crowd parted, whispering, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Lucas's pulse raced. He'd seen enough history specials to know what happened to outsiders in places like this. Hey, let's talk this out, he said, his voice cracking. I'm a teacher. I'm harmless. Ask my students. They ignore me all the time. The guards didn't care. They hauled him up the pyramid steps, each one steeper than the last, until they reached a platform overlooking the plaza. Below, the crowd swelled, their chants rising like a storm. At the platform's edge stood an altar, its stone surface slick and dark. Lucas's stomach churned. Oh, hell no, he muttered. I am not becoming a history lesson. But the priest didn't draw a knife. Instead, he pointed at Lucas's t-shirt, then at the marker in his hand, his expression a mix of suspicion and intrigue. Lucas followed his gaze. The marker? An idea sparked. If he couldn't talk his way out, maybe he could teach his way out. He held up the marker like a wand. This? It's not a weapon. It's magic. Watch. He turned to the altar, praying it wasn't sacrilegious, and scrawled a simple equation. 2 + 2 = 4. The crowd gasped. The priest leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Lucas seized the moment. Numbers, he said, tapping the equation. They make the world make sense. Want to learn? He mimed counting on his fingers, grinning like he was back in Albuquerque, charming a room of bored teens. The priest didn't smile, but he didn't signal the guards to kill him either. Progress. Over the next hour, Lucas became a spectacle. The guards released him, and a gaggle of children gathered, drawn by his strange clothes and animated gestures. He knelt in the dirt, using pebbles to teach basic addition. 1 + 1 is 2, he said, holding up stones. The kids mimicked him, their faces lighting up as they grasped the concept. Lucas couldn't help but laugh. These kids were sharper than his Albuquerque students, and they didn't even have TikTok to distract them. He pointed at the pyramid, its massive steps gleaming in the sun. You know, back home, we'd call that a giant chalkboard, perfect for math. The children giggled, though they didn't understand the joke. Lucas didn't care. For the first time since landing in this bizarre world, he felt like himself a teacher, not a victim. But his joy was short-lived. A horn blared, and the crowd scattered. A procession approached, led by a man in a feathered headdress, his cloak shimmering with quetzal plumes. The king, Lucas assumed, his presence commanding silence. Behind him, a group of stern-faced men in black robes, priests, or advisors, glared at Lucas. One stepped forward, his voice low and venomous, speaking in halting words Lucas somehow understood, as if the time rift had granted him partial translation. You defile our ways, outsider. Teaching is forbidden. Numbers are sacred. for priests alone. Lucas's throat tightened. Forbidden? But the kids, they're learning. They're happy. The advisor's eyes flashed. Happiness is not power. Knowledge is. He raised a hand, and the guards advanced. Lucas backed away, his mind racing. He'd survived the altar, but now he'd pissed off the wrong people. Teaching math was apparently a crime here, and he was the criminal. As the guards closed in, a child tugged at Lucas's Slevia girl. With bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin, she pressed a small clay token into his hand, carved with a glyph. "For luck," she whispered, then darted away. Lucas clutched the token, his heart pounding. He didn't know where he was or how he'd gotten here, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just a teacher anymore. He was a rebel in a world that didn't want him, and his fight was just beginning. The guards seized him again, dragging him toward a stone building at the plaza's edge. The crowd watched, their whispers a mix of awe and fear. Lucas glanced at the pyramid, its shadow stretching like a warning. Somewhere in this city, answers wait about the time rift, about his purpose here. But first, he had to survive. And if he was going down, he'd do it his way, with a marker in his hand and a lesson on his lips. The stone cell was damp, its walls etched with glyphs that seemed to pulse in the flickering torchlight. Lucas Harper sat on the cold floor, his back against the wall, clutching the clay token the gap-toothed girl had given him. Its carved symbol a spiral, like a coiled snake felt warm in his palm, as if it held a secret. Outside, the Mayan city hummed with life. Distant drums, the murmur of crowds, the occasional cry of a macaw. But inside, Lucas was alone, a math teacher from Albuquerque, trapped in a world that didn't know what a quadratic equation was or why it mattered. "Survive a time rift. Check," he muttered, forcing a grin. "Get thrown in ancient jail for teaching addition? Double check." The guards had locked him here after his stunt at the pyramid, where he dared to scribble numbers on an altar and call the sacred structure a giant chalkboard. Not his finest moment, but it had kept him alive. Barely. The black-robed advisor's words echoed in his mind. "Teaching is forbidden. Numbers are sacred. For priests alone." Lucas snorted. "Sacred? Numbers are for everyone. Try balancing a checkbook without them." Of course, this city didn't have checkbooks, or banks, or Wi-Fi. He was in deep. A clank at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. The heavy stone slab groaned open, and a guard gestured for him to follow. Lucas stood, brushing dirt off his red-hot Chili Peppers t-shirt, which was now smeared with mud and sweat. "What's this? A field trip?" he asked. The guard's scowl said no. Lucas shrugged, pocketing the token. "Worth a shot." They led him through the city's winding streets, past vibrant murals of jaguars and starry skies, to a shaded courtyard near a smaller pyramid. A dozen children waited there, their eyes wide with curiosity. Among them was the gap-toothed girl, her braids adorned with tiny shells. She waved shyly, and Lucas's heart lifted. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. A woman stood nearby, her woven dress embroidered with turquoise threads, her face stern but not unkind. She spoke in halting words Lucas could just understand, thanks to whatever time rift magic had tweaked his brain. "You teach, quietly, no priests see." Lucas blinked. "Wait, you're letting me teach? After the whole forbidden thing?" The woman's eyes flicked to the shadows, where guards lingered. "Children need, but careful. Priests watch." She handed him a basket of pebbles and maize kernels, then stepped back. Lucas grinned. A secret classroom in a Mayan city? This was either the coolest gig of his life or a one-way ticket to that blood-stained altar. He knelt before the kids, his teacher instincts kicking into overdrive. All right, crew, I'm Lucas, your math guy. Back in Albuquerque, I'd be using a whiteboard, but today we've got... He dumped the basket, scattering pebbles and kernels. Nature's finest. Who's ready to play? The kids leaned in, intrigued. Lucas had always believed math was a game patterns, puzzles, a dance of logic. If he could make it fun for bored New Mexico teens, he could make it fun for kids who'd never seen a number. He started simple, arranging pebbles in groups. This is 2, he said, holding up 2 stones. This is 3, he added another. The kids mimicked him, their small hands quick and eager. The gap-toothed girl, whom Lucas nicknamed Shelley for her shell-adorned braids, was the fastest, her eyes sparkling as she counted aloud. Lucas upped the ante, turning addition into a race. First one to make 5 plus 3 gets... eternal glory. The kids laughed, scrambling to grab kernels. Shelley won, stacking 8 kernels in a neat pile. Lucas high-fived her, ignoring the weird looks from the guards. You're a math rock star, Shelley. To keep things lively, he invented a game called Pyramid Piles. He drew a triangle in the dirt, mimicking the city's pyramids, and had the tenant children stack pebbles to match equations. 4 plus 2 makes? He prompted. 6, they shouted, piling stones. Lucas laughed, his voice echoing. You guys are better than my 11th graders, and they've got calculators. The courtyard buzzed with energy, the kids' laughter drowning out the distant drums. For a moment, Lucas forgot he was a prisoner, forgot the priest's threats. He was just a teacher, doing what he loved. But he couldn't ignore the pyramid looming nearby, its shadow creeping across the courtyard like a warning. He decided to lean into his outsider status, pointing at the massive structure. You know, back home, we'd call that the world's biggest chalkboard. Imagine writing equations up there. The kids giggled, but the woman supervising them tensed, glancing at the guards. Lucas winced. Right, no chalkboard jokes, my bad. Still, the pyramid sparked an idea. He started using its steps as a visual aid, having the kids count them to practice larger numbers. 20 steps, plus 10 more, makes 30, Shelley called, bouncing with pride. Lucas beamed. These kids were naturals. Word of his lessons spread. By the 3rd day, the courtyard was packed, not just with kids, but with curious adult weavers, farmers, even a grizzled warrior with a scar across his cheek. Lucas turned it into a show, juggling pebbles while teaching subtraction. 5 minus 2 catch. He tossed 3 stones to Shelley, who caught them with a grin. The crowd clapped, and Lucas bowed, hamming it up. Thank you, Las Vegas. I'm here all week. The adults didn't get the reference, but they smiled, drawn to his energy. Lucas felt a thrill. He was changing this place, one number at a time. But success came with danger. That afternoon, as he taught multiplication with maize kernels, a shadow fell over the courtyard. The black-robed advisor from the pyramid stood there, flanked by priests, their faces painted with red ochre. The crowd froze. Lucas's stomach dropped. Hi, fellas, he said, forcing a smile. Just teaching some basic math. No big deal, right? The advisor's voice was ice. You were warned, outsider. Numbers are power. You steal what is ours. He raised a hand, and guards surged forward, spears glinting. Panic seized Lucas. He glanced at the kids, their faces pale with fear. Shelley clutched her pebbles, trembling. He couldn't let them down. Thinking fast, he stepped forward, holding up his marker like a talisman. "Hold on. You think numbers are power? Let me prove they're harmless. A game. That's all this is." The advisor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't stop the guards. Desperate, Lucas turned to the crowd. "Who wants to play pyramid piles? Winner gets my magic stick." He waved the marker, praying his showmanship would buy time. The warrior with the scarred cheek stepped forward, his voice gruff. "I play." Lucas swallowed. This guy looked like he could snap him in half. But the crowd cheered, and the advisor hesitated, sensing the shift in mood. Lucas seized the chance, drawing a giant triangle in the dirt. "Okay, big guy, 5 + 4, go." The warrior fumbled with the pebbles, his massive hands clumsy, but Lucas coached him, keeping it light. "Come on, you've got this. Pretend it's jaguar teeth." The crowd laughed, and the warrior grinned, stacking 9 pebbles. Lucas declared him the winner, handing over the marker with a flourish. "You're the champ, my man." The advisor wasn't amused. He snatched the marker, snapping it in half. The crowd gasped. Lucas's heart sank, but he kept his cool. "Easy, buddy. It's just plastic." "Want me to stop teaching?" "Fine. But these kids," he gestured to Shelley, "and the others, they're smarter than you think. Ban me, and they'll keep counting." "You can't stop that." The advisor's face twisted with rage, but the warrior stepped between them, his presence a silent warning. The crowd murmured, their support palpable. The advisor spat a curse and stormed off, the priests trailing him. Lucas exhaled, his knees weak. The warrior clapped his shoulder, nearly knocking him over. "You brave, strange man," he said, handing Lucas the broken marker. Shelley ran up, hugging his leg. "You stay?" she asked. Lucas ruffled her hair, his throat tight. "Not going anywhere, kid." But as the crowd dispersed, the supervising woman pulled him aside, her voice low. "Priest's plan. They speak of sacrifice. You must hide." Lucas's blood ran cold. He'd won this round, but the priests weren't done. Teaching was his weapon, but it was also his crime. As night fell, he slipped into the jungle, the clay token heavy in his pocket. The city's drums echoed, a reminder of the danger closing in. Somewhere in this ancient world, answers wait about the time rift, about his purpose. But first, he had to stay alive. And if he was going to fight, he'd do it his way, with numbers, games, and a spark of Albuquerque defiance. The jungle air clung to Lucas Harper like a second skin, thick with the scent of wet earth and blooming orchids. He crouched behind a ceiba tree, its gnarled roots shielding him from the city's prying eyes. The clay token from Shelley, the gap-toothed girl, burned in his pocket, its spiral glyph a nagging mystery. 3 days ago, he'd been a math teacher in Albuquerque, doodling equations on a whiteboard. Now, he was a fugitive in a Mayan city, circa 1000 CE, dodging priests who wanted him dead for teaching kids to count. "Talk about a career pivot," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. His Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt was tattered, his sneakers caked with mud, but his resolve was iron. He'd started something a spark of learning, and he wasn't about to let it die. A rustle in the undergrowth made him freeze. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Lucas held his breath as a figure emerged, the woman who'd supervised his secret lessons, her turquoise, embroidered dress catching the moonlight. Her name, he'd learned, was Ixchel, a weaver with a quiet defiance that matched his own. "They come for you," she whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows. "The king summons. You teach his son, or you face the altar." Lucas's stomach lurched. The altar. He'd seen its dark stains, smelled the coppery tang of blood. "Teach what, exactly?" he asked, his voice low. Ixchel's reply was grim. "The prince must win the trial of wit. 3 days. Fail, and you are sacrificed." Lucas followed her through the jungle, his mind racing. A trial? For a prince? This wasn't just teaching, it was life or death. As they neared the city, the drums grew louder, their rhythm a pulse of impending doom. The plaza glowed with torchlight, packed with people chanting under the Great Pyramid's shadow. At its base stood the king, his Quetzal-plumed headdress shimmering, his presence silencing the crowd. Beside him was a boy, maybe 12, with sharp eyes and a nervous frown. The prince, Lucas guessed. And he looked terrified. The black-robed advisor, the one who'd snapped Lucas's marker, stepped forward, his voice dripping venom. "Outsider, you claim numbers are power. Prove it. Teach Prince Kinich to triumph in the trial of wit, a contest of mind against the priests chosen. 3 days. Fail, and your heart feeds the gods." The crowd gasped, and Lucas's throat tightened. He glanced at the altar atop the pyramid, its stone gleaming under the stars. "No pressure, right?" he quipped, forcing a grin. The king's gaze was unreadable, but Kinich's eyes met his, pleading. Lucas nodded. "Deal. L. Let's make this kid a math wizard." The guards led him to a stone chamber within the palace, its walls painted with scenes of warriors and starry skies. Kinich sat on a woven mat, clutching a jade pendant. "I'm Lucas," he said, kneeling to the boy's level. "Back in Albuquerque, I teach kids like you. Ever heard of a pop quiz? This is the ultimate one." Kinich frowned, confused, but his shoulders relaxed. Lucas took it as a win. He had 3 days to turn this kid into a geniuser, at least fake it well enough to survive. Day 1 was chaos. Kinich was smart but untrained, his mind a blank slate for numbers. The trial of wit, Lucas learned, was a public contest of logic, riddles, and calculations, testing astronomy, calendars, and math skills. The priests hoarded like gold. Lucas started with basics, using maize kernels to teach addition and multiplication. "Think of it like a game," he said, arranging kernels in a grid. 3 rows of 4. "How many?" Kinich counted, hesitating. 12? Lucas high-fived him. "Nailed it. You're gonna crush this." But the boy's confidence faded when Lucas introduced the Mayan vigesimal system base 20, not the base 10 Lucas knew. "This is like learning Klingon," he groaned, rubbing his temples. Still, he adapted, drawing glyphs in the dirt to mimic Mayan numerals. To keep Kinich engaged, Lucas turned lessons into stories. "Imagine you're a trader in Santa Fe," he said, leaning in. "You've got 20 cacao beans, but you need 40 for a jaguar pelt. How many more?" Kinich's eyes lit up, solving it with pebbles. Lucas grinned. "Kid, you're a natural." But time was slipping away, and the priest's spies lurked outside, their whispers a constant threat. Lucas caught one peering through the chamber's window, his red-painted face a mask of malice. The pressure was suffocating, but Lucas hid it, cracking jokes to keep Kinich focused. "What do you call a Mayan math nerd?" "A glyphic genius," the prince giggled, and Lucas felt a pang of hope. Day 2 brought a twist. Ixchel slipped into the chamber at dawn, her face pale. "The priests rig the trial," she whispered. "They choose riddles. Only their champion knows complex calendars, star patterns." Lucas's heart sank. Cheating priests? Of course. He needed a plan, fast. He quizzed Kinich on the Mayan calendar, using a stick to sketch the 260-day Tzolk'in cycle. "It's like a cosmic clock," he said, tracing circles. 20 days, 13 numbers. Track it like a scoreboard. Kinich nodded, but his hands shook. The kid knew the Stakesha's failure meant Lucas's death, maybe his own disgrace. Lucas ruffled his hair. "Hey, we're the underdogs. Ever see Rocky? We're gonna train hard and win dirty." That night, Lucas snuck out, risking everything to spy on the priests. He crept through the city, dodging patrols, until he reached a temple where the advisor chanted with his acolytes. Their words were cryptic, but Lucas caught enough. The trial's final riddle involved the long count calendar, a system of nested cycles tracking time across centuries. Lucas's head spun. This wasn't high school algebra, this was cosmic math, and he was no astronomer. But he memorized what he could, sketching glyphs on a scrap of bark with a charred stick. As he slipped back to the palace, a guard spotted him, his spear flashing. Lucas sprinted, heart pounding, diving into an alley as the guard's shout echoed. He made it back, breathless, but the close call left him shaken. Time was running out. Day 3 was a blur of desperation and brilliance. Lucas drilled Kinich on the long count, using his sketches to simplify it. "Think of it like stacking Legos," he said. "Each cycle builds on the last days, months, years." Kinich caught on, solving practice riddles with growing confidence. But Lucas knew the priest's champion would be ruthless, armed with tricks Kinich couldn't anticipate. He needed an edge. Digging into his Albuquerque ingenuity, he taught Kinich a modern trick: mental math shortcuts. For big numbers, round up, then adjust, he said, showing how to estimate products. Kinich's jaw dropped. "This is magic," Lucas laughed. "Nah, just math hacks. You're welcome, ancient world." As the trial loomed, Lucas's nerves frayed. The chamber felt like a cage, the air heavy with incense and dread. Kinich clutched his jade pendant, whispering prayers. Lucas wanted to reassure him, but his own fear gnawed. What if he'd missed something? What if the priest's riddles were unbeatable? Shelley's token felt heavier in his pocket, its spiral glyph a taunt. Was it a clue? A warning? He had no time to wonder. The drums began, summoning them to the plaza. The trial of wit was a spectacle. The plaza brimmed with thousands, their chants shaking the earth. The pyramid loomed, its altar a grim reminder of the stakes. The king sat on a throne of jaguar pelts, Kinich at his side, while the priest's champana gaunt youth with a serpent tattoo stood smugly. Lucas stood behind Kinich, his tattered t-shirt drawing stares. "Showtime, kid," he whispered. "Let's make these priests eat their glyphs." The first round was riddles, testing calendar knowledge. The advisor posed a question about the Tzolk'in cycle, and Kinich answered flawlessly, earning cheers. Lucas fist pumped, ignoring the priest's glares. The second round was calculation-strayed scenarios, like Lucas's Santa Fe stories. Kinich solved them with his mental math tricks, outpacing the serpent-tattooed youth. The crowd roared, but the advisor's smile was cold. Lucas knew the real test was coming. The final round was the long count riddle, the one Lucas had overheard. The advisor's voice boomed. When does the fifth Bach ton end, and what star rises? Lucas's heart raced. He'd prepped Keenage for this, but the boy froze, his eyes wide. The serpent youth smirked, ready to answer. Lucas leaned close, whispering, "You've got this. Stack the cycles like Legos." "Venus rises. Trust me," Keenage nodded, his voice trembling as he answered, detailing the date and star with precision. The crowd held its breath. The king's astrologer confirmed it correct. The plaza erupted, but the advisor's face twisted with rage. Lucas exhaled, dizzy with relief, but the tension snapped like a whip. The advisor shouted, "The outsider cheats. He defiles our gods." Guards surged, spears raised. Lucas grabbed Keenage, shielding him. "We won fair, you sore loser," he yelled. But the crowd was chaos, some cheering, others screaming for blood. The king rose, his voice cutting through the din. "Enough!" He pointed at Lucas. "You have proven your worth. The prince triumphs. You live." Lucas sagged, his legs jelly. Keenage hugged him, tears in his eyes. The crowd chanted Lucas's name, a strange sound in this ancient world. But as guards escorted them back to the palace, the advisor slipped close, his whisper chilling. "You win today, outsider. But the road of time watches. You cannot escape it." Lucas's hand went to the token, its spiral glyph suddenly heavy with meaning. The trial was over, but a deeper mystery loomed, and he was far from safe. The torchlit plaza of the Mayan city pulsed with life, a sea of faces chanting under the Great Pyramid's shadow. Lucas Harper stood at its base, his heart still racing from the trial of wit. Prince Keenage, his 12-year-old prodigy, had just outsmarted the priest's champion, solving a long-count riddle that saved Lucas from the sacrificial altar. The crowd's roar was deafening, their voices weaving his name into a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and surreal. A math teacher from Albuquerque, now a hero in a world of jaguar gods and star calendars? "Eat your heart out, Indiana Jones," Lucas muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. His Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt hung in tatters, his sneakers barely holding together, but his grin was unbreakable. The king rose from his throne of jaguar pelts, his Quetzal-plumed headdress catching the firelight like a crown of emeralds. The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on him. "Outsider," he boomed, his voice carrying the weight of divinity. "You have proven your wisdom. My son triumphs because of you. You are no longer a prisoner. You are advisor to the court." The plaza erupted again, and Lucas blinked, stunned. Advisor? Him? The guy who once got a C- in history? Keenage beamed at him, clutching his jade pendant, and Lucas felt a surge of pride. "Guess I'm moving up in the world," he said, ruffling the prince's hair. "No offense, kid, but your dad's got a killer retirement plan." Ixchel, the weaver who'd risked everything to help him, stood nearby, her turquoise-embroidered dress shimmering in the torchlight. Her smile was subtle, but warm, her eyes glinting with something that made Lucas's pulse quicken. "You change us," she whispered, her voice soft as a jungle breeze. "But beware, the priests do not forgive." Lucas nodded, his hand brushing the clay token in his pocket, Shelley's gift, its spiral glyph a persistent enigma. The black-robed advisor, the one who'd tried to rig the trial, was nowhere in sight, but his parting words haunted Lucas. "The road of time watches." What did that mean? He was about to find out. The king's guards escorted Lucas to a new chamber in the palace, a far cry from the damp cell he'd known. Woven mats covered the floor, and a low table held bowls of cacao and tamales, their steam curling in the air. A mural of a starry sky adorned the walls, its glyphs glowing faintly, as if alive. Lucas sank onto a mat, his body aching but his mind buzzing. He was safe for now. But the token's weight, the advisor's threat, and the strange hum he'd felt during the time rift back in Albuquerque gnawed at him. This wasn't just a fluke. Something bigger was at play, and he was caught in its web. As he sipped cacao, its bitter warmth grounding him, a shadow slipped into the chamber. A priest, but not the advisor. This one was older, his face lined like cracked earth, his eyes sharp with secrets. His robe was deep indigo, adorned with silver beads that clinked softly. Lucas tensed, his hand tightening on the broken marker in his pocket, his only weapon, pathetic as it was. "Relax, outsider," the priest said, his voice low, almost amused. "I am Balaam, keeper of the hidden. I do not seek your death." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Your buddies seem pretty keen on turning me into a piñata. What's your deal?" Balaam knelt, his beads glinting. "You are not of this time. The road of time brought you here." Lucas's heart skipped. "The road of what now?" Balaam's gaze flicked to the token in Lucas's hand, which he'd pulled out instinctively. "That mark," he said, pointing at the spiral glyph. "It is the seal of the rift, a path between worlds. You were chosen, though why, I cannot say." Lucas stared at the token, his mind reeling. Chosen? For what? To teach math to kids who'd never seen a number? Or something more? Balaam leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "The rift lies beyond the city, in the temple of the coiled serpent. Find it, and you may return home. Or stay, and shape this world, but choose quickly. The advisor seeks the rift too, and he will kill to control it." Lucas's mouth went dry. Away home, back to Albuquerque, to chalkboards and Wi-Fi and students who ignored him, or stay here, where he'd sparked a revolution with pebbles and maize kernels. He thought of Shelley's gap-toothed grin, Keenich's triumph, Ixchel's fierce loyalty. This world was dangerous, but it was alive in a way his old life never was. Yet, the advisor's hunger for the rift chilled him. If that creep got his hands on time itself, who knew what he'd do? Lucas clutched the token, its warmth pulsing like a heartbeat. "Temple of the Coiled Serpent, huh?" he said, forcing a grin. "Sounds like a tourist trap. Got a map?" Balaam's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Follow the stars. The serpent's eye shines at midnight." He stood, slipping into the shadows as silently as he'd come. Lucas sat frozen, the cacao forgotten. The mural's glyphs seemed to writhe, their spirals mirroring the token's mark. He was no hero, no archaeologist with a whip. He was a teacher with a knack for dad jokes and a broken marker. But he'd survived this far, and he wasn't about to quit. The next day, Lucas threw himself into his new role as advisor, partly to keep the priests off his trail, partly to buy time. The king tasked him with teaching the court's children, a privilege that made the priests scowl but thrilled Lucas. He held court in a sunlit plaza, turning math into spectacle. "All right, team," he called, juggling maize kernels. 6 times 5 go!" The kids, including Shelley, shouted. 30! And piled pebbles in a frenzy. Lucas laughed, his voice echoing. "You're sharper than my old class in Santa Fe," and they had calculators. The crowd grew, warriors and weavers joining in, drawn to his energy. Even the scarred warrior from his earlier games clapped, his grin wide. but danger simmered beneath the joy. Lucas caught glimpses of the advisor, his red-painted face lurking at the plaza's edge, his eyes like daggers. At night, whispers reached Lucas rumors of a plot, of priests gathering in secret, of a ritual tied to the rift. Ixchel confirmed it, slipping into his chamber at dusk, her dress clinging to her curves in a way that made Lucas's breath catch. "They move tonight," she said, her voice urgent. "The advisor seeks the temple of the coiled serpent. He believes the rift will make him a god." Lucas's jaw tightened. "A god? Guy's already got an ego the size of Texas. We can't let him near it." Ixchel's hand brushed his, her touch electric. "Then you must go first. I will guide you." Her eyes held a challenge, a spark that stirred something in Lucas he hadn't felt since his college days in Albuquerque. Sneaking beers with his first crush, he nodded, swallowing hard. "Lead the way, partner. Let's Indiana Jones this thing." She smirked, and Lucas swore his heart did a backflip. Under a moonless sky, they slipped through the jungle, the city's drums fading behind them. Ixchel moved like a shadow, her bare feet silent on the earth, her dress swaying with each step. Lucas stumbled, his sneakers no match for the roots and vines, but her steady hand kept him upright. The air grew heavy, charged with a hum that echoed the time rift in Albuquerque. Ahead, a ruin loomed, the temple of the coiled serpent, its stone facade carved with writhing snakes, their eyes set with jade that glowed faintly. Lucas's token pulsed, its spiral glyph warm against his skin. "This is it," he whispered, his voice tight. "The Twilight Zone, Mayan edition." They entered, the temple's corridors dark and cool, their walls etched with spirals that seemed to move in the torchlight. Ixchel's torch cast shadows that danced like specters, and Lucas's nerves frayed. "If a mummy jumps out, I'm outta here," he joked, but his heart wasn't in it. The hum grew louder, vibrating in his bones, and the token burned, guiding him deeper. They reached a chamber where a stone altar stood, its surface carved with a massive spiral. Above it, the air shimmered, a rift of light and shadow that pulsed with energy. Lucas stared, his breath catching. This was it, the road of time. Before he could move, a shout echoed. The advisor burst in, flanked by priests, their obsidian blades gleaming. His face was a mask of triumph. "You cannot stop destiny, outsider," he snarled, raising a dagger. Lucas shoved Ixchel behind him, his broken marker his only weapon. "Destiny? You're just a bully with a knife," he shot back, stalling. The rift's hum intensified, and the token blazed, its light blinding. Lucas acted on instinct, hurling it at the altar. The spiral glyph flared, and the rift exploded in a burst of light, knocking everyone back. When Lucas's vision cleared, the advisor was gone. The priests scattered, their blades clattering on the stone. The rift flickered, weaker now, its edges fraying. Ixchel gripped his arm, her eyes wide. "You sealed it," she breathed, but not for long. Lucas's heart pounded. Sealed it? He'd just thrown a rock. But the advisor's absence was a victory, however fleeting. The rift still hummed, a promise of homier danger. He looked at Ixchel, her face fierce and beautiful in the fading light. "Guess I'm not done here," he said, his voice soft. "You with me?" She nodded, her smile a spark in the dark. "Always." They slipped out, the jungle swallowing their footsteps, the rift's hum a whisper behind them. Lucas didn't know if he'd find home or face the advisor again. The road of time was calling, and he'd answer own equation, one joke, one step at a time. But what lay ahead? A way back to Albuquerque? Or a new destiny in this ancient world? Only the stars knew, and they weren't talking. Want to know where Lucas's journey leads? Will he master the road of time or face new dangers? Follow the adventure on our channel for the next chapter.